With the 2022 FIFA World Cup finally underway in Qatar, the host country has given FIFA a whole new headache. The country issued a flat-out ban on drinking at the stadiums 2 days ahead of the first whistle. In this video, we're going to take a look at why this will be bad for FIFA and run down all the other controversies surrounding the latest edition of the World Cup. First, FIFA might not mind the ban on drinking, but one of their big sponsors certainly will. Budweiser has been a longtime sponsor of FIFA, and they've used many of the past World Cups to sell their beer to fans and attendees. The chief organizing body behind football worldwide has long stood behind Budweiser, going so far as to push Brazil to repeal its ban on alcohol at stadiums in 2016. So even a conservative Muslim nation like Qatar would have been expected to make exceptions for the World Cup, right? At first, it looked like that's exactly what Qatar was doing. Alcohol was to be sold around the stadiums and its so-called fan zones and beer tents, but only to customers who had a drinking license. Muslims need not apply. This wasn't something completely out of the ordinary, as Qatar does serve alcohol at high-end hotels and bars away from the public. But then there were reports that Qatari authorities ordered the beer tents to be moved further away and to more secluded areas outside but near the stadiums. Those tents would be the only place to get some buds. And then, 2 days before the first match of the Cup, an order was handed down by the brother of the Qatari emir himself that alcohol was a no-go. It'll only be available now at fan villages and corporate hospitality boxes. In other words, if you've got the cheddar, you've got all the taps you need. Now, here's how Budweiser responded. Their Twitter account has been dishing some sass, as you'd expect from Twitter. At first, the account, quote, tweeted the news with the caption, "Well, this is awkward." That tweet has been deleted, but they did later announce that the winner of the Cup will score themselves a lifetime supply of Budweiser, which might just be coming from their Qatar-bound stock. Things are chillier on the corporate side of things, as you'd imagine. After all, Budweiser's parent company, AB InBev, has a deal worth $112 million with FIFA, and that's exactly what Qatar has decided to stiff them on. The company announced that they were looking forward to selling all the beer they could within the new rules. As far as FIFA is concerned, though, InBev is now looking for compensation. Budweiser is sponsoring FIFA in the 2026 World Cup too, and the amount of the sponsorship is about the same as it is in Qatar. It's a safer bet, though, as the 2026 Cup will be taking place across North America, where beer isn't likely to get banned out of nowhere. All the same, Budweiser is apparently looking to some of that sponsorship knocked off. It sure looks like the hosts of the 2022 World Cup have put FIFA between enough of a rock and a hard place that they'll have to give Budweiser anything they want. Moving on, what could this mean for the future of the FIFA World Cup? Clearly, there will be more World Cups going forward. However, Qatar is totally showing FIFA that hosting the tournament in the Middle East or any other conservative Muslim nation is a bad idea. This is the first World Cup to be hosted in the Arab world, and it might just be the last if this is how things continue. Alcohol might be the least of the worries here. In Qatar's culture, many of the freedoms that Western football fans might take for granted are looked down upon. Examples include public displays of affection, women showing too much skin, public drunkenness, and the general craziness that fans like to indulge in whenever their teams win. The country's track record on LGBT rights is the opposite of promising, and while the government insists that everyone is welcome, anyone who isn't cishet should probably tread lightly in Qatar. After all, the government has said elsewhere that they can't guarantee that the Qatari public won't do something to them on their own. Jewish people are another group that was given a raw deal recently. The country promised that kosher food and Jewish prayer services would be available before rescinding that promise at the last minute. That literally means that if you're Jewish, your food options are going to be incredibly limited in Qatar. This naturally resulted in many Jewish visitors canceling their trips. So, way to go, Qatar. Moving on to the real story of the 2022 World Cup. This whole affair got to a rocky start in 2010 when FIFA announced that Qatar's bid had won out in the first place. That victory was shrouded in allegations of bribery, and those allegations were confirmed during the massive FIFA scandal of the mid-2010s. But really, it was clear even then there were so many reasons not to host the World Cup in Qatar. For starters, the World Cup traditionally takes place in the summer, and in the Gulf, summer temperatures can peak in the low 50 degrees Celsius. Those are not hot football playing conditions. Now, shifting the World Cup to the winter was always a controversial idea, but Qatar was promising to invent some futuristic technologies to make it possible to air condition an outdoor stadium. That clearly didn't happen, and the World Cup ended up moving to winter. The other reason why Qatar didn't make sense as a host venue is that at the time it was a tiny country with one major metropolis and lots of desert surrounding it. Qatar decided to solve that problem by building a whole new city and a network of transportation from the sand up in 10ish years. Is that an impressive feat? Sure is, but at what cost? Well, $300 billion to start, but also loads of labor. And that brings us to the story that has defined this World Cup. Coming up, it's time to talk about labor rights in Qatar. The World Cup ended up exposing the world to the horrors of blue-collar work life in the Gulf. While these issues came up during the construction of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, that was a long time ago, and a whole new generation of people learned for the first time just what passes for labor rights in countries like Qatar. Outlets like The Guardian reported on how Qatar was basically importing cheap labor from countries like Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Recruiting agencies in these countries would charge insane fees for the promise of a job working at a FIFA World Cup stadium. Jobs like these are tempting because a handful of Qatari riyals can be worth a lot in their local currency, and so these workers would get on flights to the Arabian Peninsula. Once there, they would essentially become trapped in the country through the so-called kafala system of sponsorship. Basically, their visas listed their employers as sponsors, and it was only the employers who could cancel the visas and issue an exit permit to the workers. Without that, the workers can't leave. To really lock the workers in, employers also often snatch away their passports. The thing is, even if this kafala system didn't exist, the workers were just not paid enough to be able to flee the country anyway. And that's despite the horrid conditions in which these people are forced to work. Finally, remember when we were talking about peak temperatures in Qatar? Sure, it would be inappropriate to ask professional football players to play in the summer heat of Qatar. There was a lot of consideration for those guys in the planning of this tournament. However, it's a disturbing thing to realize these migrant workers were forced to work for days and months in exactly those temperatures, building the stadiums and the entire city of Lusail. Their living conditions are absolutely inhumane too. Workers are basically imprisoned in labor camps with 8 men living in each room. The camps have poor sewage, sanitation, and hygiene, but this is the life they're stuck with for the time being, and they won't be able to get out at least until the World Cup is over, or until they die. After everything you've heard so far, it won't surprise you to know that between 2010 and 2020, when most of the construction work took place, 6,500 workers died in Qatar. That right there is the human cost of managing a World Cup in a country with the wrong climate conditions and a lack of key infrastructure. Considering where this video has ended up, restricting the sale of alcohol feels like a pretty small thing, but all of this put together will be the story of the 2022 World Cup. Will the tournament ever return to the Gulf? Saudi Arabia is trying to make it happen in 2030, so we'll have to see how that goes. That's it for today's video. Let us know in the comments section below what you thought of everything we've discussed today. And while you're at it, tell us how you're feeling about the World Cup in light of all the controversies. But whatever you do, just remember that it's a red card penalty to not like, share, and subscribe.